And again, our China. And again, I want to repeat again why I talk about China so often. And that is because so underreported. Although, in the G7 and so on, we've had a tremendous amount of discussions, surrounding China, because one of the main uh, items on the agenda of the G7 was to try and see how you could stop China having this amount of influence that it's currently exerting on trade and commerce on all fronts. Technology, think of it, seem to be sort of making headway. And there seems to be a very short, if you like, vision that the West has of itself as to what it needs to do, because it is coming out of what I would call the post-colonial period, I suppose, and the type of empire type of vision that was there following that the colonial period. Because the colonial period had, of course, the British Empire, which was the superpower of that day. It went, and then USA came along, and then it sort of challenged the communism on the basis of democracy and so on, and free markets. But then it started to lose its sort of, if you like, vision. And this is the main thing that is happening right now. Why is vision so important? Because if you look at what it is that countries ultimately want, it's the betterment of their people. And if that betterment it gets swayed by one thing or another, then I think we're off the track. We take our eye off the ball. And that's what's happened generally to USA. When Trump came along, he sort of took the eye off the ball and made building of walls a priority and raising tariffs and so on. And of course, what happened because of that is that the USA lost a great deal of moral standing in the world. And of course, the democratic system also took a big beating, saying that the democratic system came under the influence of big money, the campaign finances, and brought about people like Trump, who essentially played on the fears of the people. So, the systems are in question now. So what we have now is really a question of seeing what is it that we call democracy that is going to really deliver if it is not going to sort of deliver to the people. If it's just going to make more and more people richer, then I think it's not democracy, as Mahbubani says. You remember my last talk was giving you a link on Mahbubani, Professor Mahbubani of Singapore, who talked about essentially having a goal. Countries need to have a goal, not just ideology. A goal, and the goal, he says, which China has very clearly declared, is to sort of upliftment of the people and for betterment of their lives. That is the message that I think now needs to seep into the democratic sort of world, as it were, as well, and not just have it swayed for the capitalists in terms of making just the capitalists more sort of wealthier, and the trickle-down effect affects the general public. And he gives very good quotes, just to remind you. He says, over the last 30 years, 50% of the US workers' wages have not risen. And yet we've created so many billionaires and so on and so forth. So you can see the disparity that is there. So China is coming out with a different message. It says, look, unless you have a particular sort of goal in mind, that is the upliftment of people and the bettering their lives, you're going to be sort of going astray. And that's quite clear. And the example that it gave, which I think is also interesting, is that if USA is going to squander its resources in fighting wars and developing fighter planes, like he gave an example of F-35 taking off $1.7 trillion to develop, whereas the $1.7 trillion that was spent by China was on the Belt and Road, which built roads, infrastructure, all over the world, on 65 countries. So you can see the disparity and the way that is being lost, as it were. A good sort of irony there. The Belt and Road shows you the way, but the F-35 doesn't, nor do the gunboat diplomacy or the bases. that are all over the world as far as the West is concerned, which has deployed it and on the basis of saying, yeah, well, that's what we need to do to keep everybody in place and have them listen to what we think is the best solution, which is liberal democracy. And we are starting to question that. Anyway, back to this thing about China in the Middle East. Now, we talked about China being, in Asia, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, South America, in even Europe a little bit. And now I'm going to talk about China in the Middle East. Now, China in the Middle East, why is it important for China? Well, let's look at the Middle East. What is Middle East? Middle East is really a group of countries that have enormous amount of energy at their disposal. And that's why I think it became a very important area for USA, for the West, for the whole world, because everybody was dependent on energy. The hydrocarbons came from there mostly. And it was, kept at a very low price until, 70s, and then the oil prices went up. And then, of course, energy started to sort of, anyway, play a very crucial role in every country's development. So it is with China as well. Now, China doesn't have its own sort of oil wells in the country. So for it, the Middle East is a very, very important sort of area. And we shall see that as we go along. Okay, what's on the agenda today? Here we are. So on the agenda, let me mute everybody. If you don't mind, I will sort of do that. Okay. Mute all, yeah. Okay. Here we are. So our agenda is going to be this. So I just gave you my take overall, which was that about the leadership and the models, and of course, one other thing which I forgot to mention is, the message that we've been having, which is really a false message in my opinion, that the USA has been pushing forward in the name of democracy and in the name of human rights, is the antagonism towards communism. And subsequently, when communism, Russia went down, or Soviet Union went down, then Islam became the sort of, the enemy of the West in so many ways. So a false message. And that's why I think progress has stalled in the West. Because, the dinosaurs in the State Department and in the White Hall, they are still living in a colonial past and imperial mindsets and the hegemony that seems to be the order of the day of the earlier decades. So if you have a false narrative, and if you create demonization of other countries of the other, then you're not going to be looking at the real problem and come up with real solutions. So that's where we are at the moment. So that's my take. So let's get on with the rest of the thing. What I'm going to be talking about is what are the projects that China is doing in the Middle East. And these are the countries that I just thought I might mention a few projects that they're engaged in and making a big, big difference to the countries. Okay, so we asked the question, what is China's main interest of this region? Okay, to briefly put, it is energy, commerce, money, and religion. That's the region. It has all that in big dollops of measure. So located at the crossroads of 3 distinct continents, it's the largest source of hydrocarbons in the world. It's an enclave through which a good deal of international trade passes, and it's the heartland of one of the biggest religions on the planet. We need not mention who they are. And not to mention that it's also a big piggy bank. Why piggy bank? That's an interesting question. Piggy bank because if you see the oil that has been coming in from that region has going to the West essentially, and lots of dollars have come into the Middle East. Now, in order to balance the books, the West has said, oh, no, we can't sort of have this imbalance. We want to be able to sell you something back. And of course, they started selling arms. Can you believe that? Just Saudi Arabia alone bought about 60 billion worth of arms. So the West has started sort of, exchanging oil for arms. And that's why that area is so sort of, crucially, if you like, as a tinderbox. So there you are, a policy, again, which I think has not led to stability, but rather to instability And it's a bit of a time bomb in my opinion. So the piggy bank is there in that sense that the money has got to be had one way or another out of that region. Okay, so who comes into the area now? Because China wasn't visible at all for a few decades in that region. It kept quiet, but now it says so much of its own trade is so important, it starts to sort of make for, okay, I'm going to make that a little bit bigger so that we can have a look. So this is our old friend that I've repeatedly showed you, the Belt and Road. The Belt and Road is the infrastructure in all these countries that China is building in order to send its goods and bring back the resources. Now, G7, just to sort of have a little aside here, this meeting that is going on in G7 in Cornwall is talking about counteracting this BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, with a Western BRI. I mean, this is rather, if you ask me, a bit late in the day, because this BRI of China has been there for decades now. So if you're going to start building a comparable BRI, I think that's probably just words in my opinion. And we don't even know. I think the commentator, when I was listening to the G7 meeting, it said, yeah, we think we are going to do this and get all the Europe and USA and everybody, all the democracies to work together. But we don't know how it's going to be funded. So that's where the real sort of game starts. So we'll see how that's going to be funded and how many people are going to take this up as well. So it's rather late in the day, but we'll see how that pans out. Okay, so here we are. Now, US and China are the main sort of, if you like, combatants in that area. So it is an area which is very hard pressed, very conflicted area because of that, the energy and the money and the arms that have poured in, and all sorts of ideologies, extremists, all that has evolved from that. So utter mess, if you ask me. And now both empires are fighting for control of the Middle East using very different strategies. You see, the recent decades of the Great American Empire had a very strong hand in controlling that region. And now silently and without attracting attention, things are beginning to shift down. Now that shift is taking place because of China, see? And all because another empire is on the sea. Now both empires are fighting for control of the Middle East using very different strategies. This is important to remember. Now what has been the old strategy? Bases, gunboat diplomacy of the old colonial times, and essentially putting your own sort of dictators in place and supporting them who carried out, the wishes of the yes, sir, three bags full, sir type of policies. So that has been the strategy so far. But China is the second biggest consumer of oil just behind the United States. So China has now an equal amount of interest. And of course, it wants to import all that because prosperity is tied to that energy. But it says we are going to deploy a different type of policy. We'll just see that in the next few slides. Now, this is the current state of affairs with China. You see, if one is looking at any country's requirements, which are crucial, this is the case of China, oil production and imports. The green one is what they produce domestically themselves in the country. Now you can see that hasn't changed much, so they don't have oil wells in China. But here, this is the orange one is the one which is increasing, and this is the imports of hydrocarbons coming into the country. Millions of barrels. So right now we are here, about 12 to so many billions of millions of barrels a day are being imported from the Middle East for China. So it's really hungry for all sorts of energy. So here, repeating again, China is the second biggest consumer of oil just behind the United States because it's got the second largest economy. And of course, in order to be able to, have the resources and the energy, it has to import oil. In 2019, China became the world's largest natural gas importer across the world. So to give you an idea, today half of all of oil that China consumes comes from the Middle East. So you can see that China is immensely, dependent on the Middle East oil. The same thing happens with the natural gas, to import more and more oil to meet its need. So both gas and oil are the big sort of things that China needs from that region. And here is another sort of picture to tell you its sort of dependence in a way of, let me make it bigger. Chinese crude oil imports by country is a 2018 figures. So you can see half of them come from the Middle East, this blue patch here, see? Middle East, half of them practically comes from the Middle East. The orange comes from Russia, Angola, green, Brazil here, and all the other ones are smaller here. So you can see that its dependence on oil is enormous on the Middle East, like most other countries as well. So China accounts for a third of the world's natural gas demand. Since 2011, China consumes more oil coal than any other country. So one of the ways that it has developed so far is because it has plenty of coal. So it has been using it and polluting the world as well with it. But then, they come and say, look, every country has done their development using coal. And subsequently, when oil came along, they started to switch to oil, and we want to switch to oil as well now. So that's precisely why the government is pushing to replace this energy source with a cleaner alternative, renewable energies, nuclear energy, and natural gas. Now they're racing ahead to do that. In fact, some of the biggest farms that they have of renewable energy is there in China, and also they've got a lot of nuclear energy production facility as well. Okay, this is another sort of graph which tells us about where the oil is coming from for China. We can see that most of it comes from Saudi Arabia, 14% nearly. Then others from Iraq, and then from Oman and Iran and Kuwait. Just in passing, we can say that they made a deal with Iran, $400 billion thing. It's one of my talks, I think I gave some months ago, China in Iran. Now they're making that huge $400 billion investment in Iran for 25 years, over 25 years, and in exchange for Iran oil. Now, Iran, because it has been sanctioned, hasn't been doing too much of exports. But now when China came along with this, they say, okay, fine, we're going to sort of accept your offer. We'll supply you with all the oil that you need, and you give us all the things that we need. So you can see sanctions hasn't really worked. It has backfired. And yet, I think, the people in the State Department and the White House, they seem to continue to believe that that's supposed to adopt. So these are the places that they're going to be making projects, because to get oil from these places, they need to be able to also sort of pay them in some kind. Okay, as you know, the economy is very focused on exports. We saw that, for about 30 years they were closed, and now they have opened up. The sleeping dragon, as it were, has woken up, and everybody was warning that it's best to let the sleeping sleep, but it didn't happen. When Xi Jinping came along, he said, no, we're going to wake up and we're going to assert ourselves more, and now we see a bit more assertive China. And of course, they want to be able to protect their exports and their markets as well in the process, and the resources. So that's the game that is on the table now. So there's another reason that explains China's growing interest in the petro-monarchies region, ensuring the safety of all their trade routes. So China is very concerned about its trade routes, because if a substantial part of all of China's trade passes directly through the Middle East, and we have, this is the type of thing that goes. Suez Canal, we heard recently, got clogged up. Something happened over there, and in the Straits of Hormuz as well. If they get sort of stopped because there's so many battleships and whatnot of US there, that can easily block or choke off those points. So for China, it says, okay, we need to have that trade flowing, because if somebody chokes us off, then our thing stops. So in order for trade to flow, China depends on both the ports and the so-called choke points in this area. So it wants to make sure that they have enough influence in that area to be able to counteract anybody trying to stop that flow of trade taking place. So you can see, immediately we are into this area. Now, these are critical choke points are the critical points in many supply chains, and if rivals such as the United States were able to close them, it would interrupt most of China's trade, both inward and outbound. So that's sort of pretty clear, because these choke points, that these choke points, I'll show a map later on, which are the critical ones. Where they're talking about places such as Suez, here we are, the Hormuz Straits as well. And keep in mind that these are the waters that are full of American Navy ships. Now, the Gulf is full of these ships, because all of the oil comes from Kuwait and from that region, the Persian Gulf. So USA has got the bases there in Bahrain, and I don't know what other places there. But it's a very, very sort of armed to the teeth area, as it were. So that's why China says, well, if we are so vulnerable for whatever may happen in the future, we've got to safeguard it and make sure that our choke points are clear and not and that doesn't lead to our trade stopping. So these are the power paths that China is sort of going to pursue. Okay, for these two reasons, that trade flow and security has both become high levels priority for Chinese government. To go about this, what is the Chinese government going to expand? They're going to expand their influence in this region. In the field of international politics, the strategy that they follow to achieve their objectives is different from that we are used to. Okay, what has been the strategy before? As I told you before, the strategy has been to build bases and offer security for transshipment and so on. Essentially, you sort of, but what happens with such positioning of big carriers and battleships and all that is the power sort of who has command over it can stop it, and stops only those and let only those people's ships go through who are friendly. So you can see the delicate situation there in the Middle East. So you see, China doesn't want to gain control in the Middle East by using the army, because that has been the formula of the USA and generally of the West to try and protect its routes, so bases and so on. So it wants to use a very different mechanism. It's nothing new. They've been doing it for all over the world. And what is this new mechanism? And that mechanism is to create a culture of economic interdependence. Now there's an important sort of difference. Now, on one side, you have, if you like, zero-sum game type of thing. We are going to sort of do trade, and then have the capital going into those countries. So one is holding the purse strings, and to a large extent, the control over these countries' resources. You see? So that has meant that the control of the individual countries was not full. But China is saying, no, we want to be able to make it interdependent, which means that we have a win-win situation. You can be our partner, not a client state. Be our partner in order to develop your economy as well as ours. So they have so they are going to be influencing they use their influence in that region using soft power as well, because just the bringing in money for digging mines and making sure that the routes are safe and building big projects is not sufficient. They want to be able to also have enough understanding cultural wise that they are not out here to exercise control to the extent of taking away their culture, local culture, but want to be able to understand the Chinese culture as well. So that is the interdependence that they're talking about. Okay, so that soft power can give China enormous influence among this region's countries, and interdependence that guarantees full access to and in some ways control of all the oil and natural gas they need. So if you have a friendly country, they're very likely going to sort of not create any problems for you. This explains why China has positioned itself as the largest investor in the region. In 2017, that's even above the United States itself. So you can see, as far as this investment goes, that strategy means you're investing in building infrastructure, developing projects, and so on and so forth. Whereas the previous sort of policy has been to try and essentially sell arms to the country and be able to then make the country feel that they're secure to defend themselves. And quite often there has not really been a threat. So what happens is you create an artificial threat and then sell arms. So that's a sort of old game that gets played. Out of every €3, so China's investment, it says, is out of every €3 that I invest in the Middle East, one of them comes from Chinese money. So you can see the enormous amount of money that is pouring into that region. So it's not just arms that are coming in or oil flowing out, but it is money coming in, which is really an important thing. And that money is used building infrastructure. It's the only region in which China's foreign investment continues to grow steadily. For example, in 2016, the Chinese company Sinopec and the Saudi company Aramco agreed to jointly build a refinery worth more than $10 billion in Saudi Arabia. So we're not building, a refinery in China. We're building Chinese are helping to build a refinery in Saudi Arabia, and not only Saudi Arabia but other countries as well. Now this is a signing thing here. You can see that you've got the Chinese premier here making the deals with these Saudis and other Arab countries. This is Saudi Arabia. Yeah, I think so. And they also built a refinery in Kuwait. So they have, in the process of doing all this, see, one of the things that China is doing, which is a smart thing to do, is that with the investment comes along the expertise as well. And they're continually building these types of projects. And in the process, they're learning how to build even more and more in a better way. That's one of the things that I remember. I told you that when HS2 was being sort of called for building and all that, China said, okay, we're going to, I think the cost was about 100 billion for HS2 for the UK. But China said, we'll do it for 50 billion. But UK government said, no, thank you. And that was it. So China does have a lot going its way. And this is Oman. Oman is also now, this is at the tip. You see this tip over here, Oman is just here at the mouth of the Gulf, as it were. And China has, made enormous investment in Oman here, built a city. And this is it, see, called Duqm. Duqm is a new city and a new port that is shooting up at the part of Oman. Today is one of the largest special economic zones in this entire Middle East. And it's here that China's companies are investing thousands and billions of dollars, refineries, ports, airports, hotels, offices. So you can see a small little titchy country like Oman has an enormous sort of industrial sort of complex being developed and making it that much more dependent on not just the oil economy, but in terms of having an alternate sort of wealth as well. So we're talking about a completely new industrial city located at the gates of Hormuz Strait. So now for China, what's it in for China? Because right at the Straits of Hormuz is the choke point. If America stops it, then China's got all this resources up there, which then will make USA think twice. So these are the sort of balances that need to be created in order to stop exercise or abuse of power. Okay, so that is Chinese shipping companies can operate without having to enter the Persian Gulf. And it's not only a haven for shipping companies. Among the billion-dollar Chinese investors, there are factories of all kinds. These are only 3 examples of the huge investment is pouring into this area. So China is sort of, trying to make the investment in strategic areas in the Middle East. So today there is Chinese money all over the Middle East, but the Chinese don't only invest the money, they also have no problem selling all their kinds of technology to these countries, especially military technology. For example, many of the military drones and ballistic missiles that are operating in the region are Chinese made. Now, because Chinese technology has really sort of also become quite advanced, these countries say, fine, we'll buy some stuff from you, and we will be able to then have, if you like, an alternate supplier of arms apart from USA. So China is getting into the game as well, so as to promote its own industry. But more so than that, it's the security of the trade route and the supply that they want to maintain. Now, all this comes precisely at the same time as other great power, the American empire, is radically changing its strategy for the Middle East. Now, there was a pivot, as we said, when Obama was there, he wanted to pivot from Middle East to Asia. And he was doing rather a good job until Trump came along and said, no, we don't want to join TPP. We'll sort of go our own way. So he really muddled things up so badly that USA doesn't know whether it's coming or going. So right now, we have a situation where USA is having to work very hard, trying to get the world on its side. And I think it's not an easy thing for Biden to do, because Biden has not made any clear distinctions and policies regarding China, which Trump introduced. Tariffs are still there and so on. The only thing that Biden has said is, okay, we want to bring the democracies together. Let's work multilaterally and so on, which was anathema to Trump. Okay, what are the projects? Now let's see how we're doing. Okay, we're halfway through. I'll continue for another 15 minutes and then we'll have Q&A. Now, Iran, I've talked about Iran and China deal, I think in one of my talks, devoted fully to that. It's a very, very big deal, $400 billion over 25 years. So what is this in for, okay, let me make that a bit bigger. So China will have access to the crude oil and gas at discounted prices for the next 25 years. So that is what China is going to be getting from Iran. What does Iran gain? Let's make that a bit bigger. According to the document, China, 280 billion is going to be invested in oil and gas industry in Iran, which means that Iran industry will be able to pump out more oil more efficiently and get new sources also set up and so on. And 120 billion in production and transportation infrastructure, which means they're going to build all sorts of pipelines and they're going to build roads and bridges and what have you. And of course, networking, they're going to have 5G. Now, one of the things about 5G, we also devoted a special lecture on this many, I'd say a few months ago. Now, 5G is one of those advanced technologies that China has, which the West doesn't have. USA is behind by 2 years and Europe is also behind by 2 years. And already 5G is in use in China in a big way because they're using e-commerce and also their self-driven cars or even they're soon to come in a big way, the electric vehicles, and also the Internet of Things, which need to communicate with each other. So you need the big data to be transferred through 5G to be able to, make for an effective network of the future. So they're going to be building that as well. And that means investing in banks and communication ports, railways, dozens of other sectors. So you can see it's a huge thing. And all that because Iran was under sanction. And there was China sitting on the sidelines for a good few years and say, okay, this is the time to come in. And of course, Iran welcomed them with both hands. And now USA is wondering, what the hell have we done? We shot ourselves in the foot. And this USA has been doing a thing for a while now. And it's not reported too much. And that's why we talk on these talks as to why China is making such good progress. It's a gift for China in a way. When USA is muddling and mishandling, it's an advantage to China. And that's why China has progressed so rapidly. Okay, this is just showing us the routes. This is China, this is Iran here, and this is a choke point here, one of them, another choke point there. And there's another choke point here, another choke point there. So, I mean, in these places, China is already, in Sri Lanka, they've already got a huge port that they've built. Here they're building, in Iran, their own island as well, and so on. So this is Huawei, this is the 5G people. And also, not only are they talking about the economic sort of cooperation, China and Iran, there's going to be military as well, because they're going to say we're going to deploy 5,000 security personnel to protect the projects in Iran built by China. China is saying we want to protect our investment, and therefore we'll have some of that strength deployed there. This is where they're going to be stationing some Chinese making it into a Chinese controlled port, simply in order to safeguard this choke point over here. So if at some point they get stopped, they have all the resources to unblock it. Now, Pakistan is also another one of those countries that I've included in the Middle East. I've talked at many, in my talks about how extensive an engagement that China has had on the economy and of Pakistan. They call it the CPEC. So here we are. They're building roads and highways and railways and ports and industrial things, refineries, energy plants. So it's a huge undertaking, and they are well into that. Here, this is just saying that Imran Khan finally is the one good leader that Pakistan has had. But before that, they were all thieves and robbers who just sort of looted the country and made themselves palaces abroad and properties abroad and so on. And I'm talking about people like Zardari and Nawaz Sharif, we've talked about many times before, the Muslim League and the People's Party. So his party, Imran Khan's party, an honest party, that's the party of justice. So he's in power, and hopefully he'll come back again in 2 years' time when the elections take place. This is just some figures about how much money is being said and what the impact is going to be on the economy. It's going to be up and up. And already the economy is doing well because the stock market has really sort of gone quite high. And some of the growth figures are also very, very interesting because, nobody is expecting growth of about 4 or 5%. I think it's about 4% GDP increase from year to year. So it is humongous achievement for Pakistan. This is just showing you the old BRI, how this linking takes place. And this grand sort of project is something we've talked about many times, but then this is just to sort of, for your record, to look at it a bit more closely where the choke points are. See, the choke points are here, the Suez, the straits over here, this Colombo here, here in the Java and Malaysia, Singapore. So here we are. Now, one of the things that Pakistan is doing is astonishingly big sort of project with China, the Gwadar. I've talked about it also before, because that not only helps Pakistan open up the whole of the country, Baluchistan, from Baluchistan to the rest of the country and to China, but it also gives access to the Central Asian republics that are there, the stans, as we call them, and also to Russia. And Russia has been in that sort of in need for centuries, when they're talking about the great game and so on. I've mentioned about this before. So this is the thing, you've got quite a lengthy infrastructure being created of rail and highways and so on and so forth. Okay, that's the future. Forget about that. Okay, now one of the things is that if you take Pakistan, now it's positioned next to China. Practically, it's got a sort of a link there through that corridor that they've got. And next to rising power can pull up Pakistan as well. China can pull Pakistan up, and that's what's happening. And we've seen that happen before. I've mentioned this before. Mexico was pulled up enormously by USA as USA was growing, to the extent that 500% increase Mexico's exports to USA. And the same thing with Turkey. Turkey being part of customs union in Europe, EU, they have also benefited enormously. So the rising sort of economies will pull up these poorer countries quite a bit. Now, here we are. I'm going to go through this very quickly because we don't have much time now. Okay, I'm going to possibly just say these are some of the projects that are underway in various countries. But let me just talk about one country, which is Israel, because Israel doesn't have oil. But yet Israel is very important for China for these reasons. Here I'll just mention that. We'll skip Saudi Arabia. That's all to do with that. Now here, China's role in Israel, I thought that would be interesting for us to just finish off. There are these leaders over here. China eager to prove its diplomatic chops. China wants to soften anti-Muslim image by backing Gaza. And what is the proposal they're bringing? It's a 4-point proposal. Immediate ceasefire, they're saying, between Palestine and Israel, humanitarian aid for Gaza, vigorous role for security in that thing there for UN Security Council, and two-state solution is what they're backing. So all very sort of sensible sort of proposals. And what are they're having in terms of investment? Container port in Haifa, Ashdod city port, and light rail in Tel Aviv. And the amount of investment, $400 million for Israeli startups, because Israel is very good at startups. They've got huge amount of technology, and China is good partnership with China, because China is also very, very advanced technologies. And this is being done by 53% of the investment is coming from state-run firms in China. So another thing about China is Israel's second largest trade partner and Israel's second largest arms provider as well. So they spent about 18 billion. So it's an expanding relationship even from that point of view. So I'll leave the other ones because those are all to do with oil. And in other words, exchanging investment paid through oil. So all the other countries of that. So I'll stop here and we'll talk about essentially the Q&A. Okay. All right, here we go. We have some keen faces full of questions, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Maureen.
Just thinking about China's influence, not just on the trade and the building of things, but are they going to influence the treatment of women in Pakistan and Iran? You know, is there going to be liberalization, or do you think they'll just sidestep all of that?
Well, you see, one of these role that China seems to be performing, and which they have done it in their own country, they're talking about not individual rights, but a community rights. Mm-hmm. They put that forward. And that means that if the community is going to benefit from the economic well-being, then the betterment of the individuals happens. So they don't get into this thing that the West is promoting all the time, human rights. They say that that is something that will happen if the economies of the region improve. So that's their argument. And I think they have proved it as well by uplifting, you know, these poor people by 800 million people of them in China and made it better. So if you look at China of today, you can see that it looks like a fairly modern city, and the women are going around in their in their sort of very smart clothes, like in the West. So you can see, that thing follows once the economic well-being comes about.
Yeah. Can I ask one other thing?
Yeah.
Sorry, just briefly about Gaza. So they want humanitarian aid, but are they going to help rebuild Gaza? I mean, maybe they could build good stuff there.
Yeah. I think they are planning to sort of have something like that. But at the moment, you see the security in that region is so sort of, volatile. Even if you build something, you never know if it's going to be knocked down or bombed out the next day.
Yeah.
So until that assurance is given in some way, I don't think major projects will be undertaken.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, Valilela.
Hi. Israel has been trying to help Gaza build quite a lot, and they've been sending over a huge amount of cement, and Hamas has stolen all the cement that Israel sent over in order to build their tunnels.
Well, that game is going to be played, I think, over and over again.
Exactly. Yeah. So it might happen again.
Yeah. Okay, Malala.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much, Shafiq. I mean, this just hasn't been dealt with in the papers or anything. It's very, very interesting. But can I just ask, you showed an increasing requirement for oil in China. Now, initially, a lot of manufacturing was thrown to China because labor was cheap. So everyone said, you know, everything was going to be manufactured in China. I thought eventually that might sort of plateau off because there'll be changes within the country. You know, there's, as you say, the poor sort of coming up, the social disparities are less. Are they less? I just imagine that eventually that would plateau off, but it's not happening yet.
Well, what is happening is that what we see is already a big change that has happened. But you see, the whole game that gets played with China is, you remember I mentioned to you in my last talk as well, that when Biden came over, one big report by the think tanks that was submitted to him said, look, it's very difficult to try and stop China sort of moving this rapidly ahead. We can't stop that too easily. And that's one of the reasons why this G7 is talking about stopping and curtailing the trade with Europe and China and so on. But I don't think they're going to succeed. And the only reason that they offered could be a possibility is to demonize the leadership of China and do the human right type of slogans on Uyghurs and on Hong Kong. Even that is not going to work because that is something which I think the Muslim countries themselves have looked at the Uyghurs and they are not sort of saying much about it because a lot of that is just pumped up propaganda. Yeah, George, are you with us? I can't hear you. You're muted.
Yes, I am indeed. I'm listening very carefully.
All right. I'm very happy to know that. Very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't get this information, you see. No, like yeah, you're a very good vehicle for communication.
Yeah. Well, you see, my sort of take is that unless you analyze the problem correctly, you can't find a solution, correct solution. And because we don't analyze the problem correctly, we end up by giving the wrong solutions. And that's where we are right now, you know? Yes, Marika.
I would like to ask you, what is the relationship between India and China economically? Because India is the second largest country after China as population goes.
Yeah, at the moment, it's not on the best of terms.
Why?
Because you see, some 20 years ago, when I was sort of looking at this China and India sort of question, because I'm from India, and it was being stated by a lot of people say India is going to surge ahead because of its democracy. And China is going to fall down by the wayside. But instead, what has happened is that China has surged ahead and India has not. Now, I'll give you a simple example as to how democracy is working in India. If you look at, in fact, in general, what democracies have a bit of a problem that the institutions are only as strong as the people that you put in them. And in India, what's happened is that the government, which is the rightist government, is putting the wrong type of people in its institution and even in parliament. And therefore, they have gone to the right, as some countries in Europe also have gone to the right. And that has, in fact, cost India quite a bit in terms of being able to pursue policies in a very coordinated fashion. Because what happens is that big money starts to talk. Like in the USA, the campaign funds determine who comes into power and so on. In India as well, a third of the Indian parliament, I think, have a criminal record. And yet they come in because they have lots of money to spend on elections and buy the votes. So in a way, what has happened to India is that all these things have slowed its progress. And that progress has cost Indian, many percentage points in their development, in their GDP. So they haven't fared well at all. Now what we have between India and China is the border problems. It's a huge 22,000 mile long border. And that border was actually defined in the British Raj days, by various people who just drew lines, as it were.
Yes, but
And
that was
China,
in 1947. We
yeah,
are now.
that's right. Before that, before British Empire was there, because China was not a very strong power. So the lines that were drawn from Arunachal Pradesh in East India, right up to Ladakh in West, have been fairly arbitrary. And China is saying, look, that is our territory. So they laid claim to a lot of area, and they fought wars against it as well. And I think China got the better of India. And now even recently near Kashmir, they had the troop movement, and they managed to claim some more sort of high positions and so on. So China and India seem to have a bit of a problem on that front. But the bigger problem between India and China is their water. You see, the waters of the Ganges of Brahmaputra, which are the big rivers that flow into India or into Bangladesh and so on, they originate in Tibet.
Yep.
And if the water is blocked in some way, it's going to be a huge type of problem for India. So they have to play the game in some sort of way which is going to be, sensible. And we'll see.
Can't India purify the water from the sea?
Sorry?
Can't India get the water from the sea?
Water? No, the water starts from the Himalayas, you see.
Yes, but you can, some countries do purify water from the sea.
Yeah.
For irrigation, for
instance. Oh, I
instance.
see. Desalination, yeah.
Yes.
They do it,
Yes.
but,
Yes.
that's very expensive.
Yes.
And China for centuries has been, and India has been dependent, in fact, the Ganges is regarded as a goddess, as a god. So it's a very sensitive area, and I don't think that's going to be resolved so easily. Desalination requires energy. Energy is expensive until, of course, Mr. Musk comes along and helps us with his batteries and desalination using power, which is affordable. We'll see how that works out as far as desalination is concerned. But that's humongous amount of water that comes through the Ganges and through the Brahmaputra. It's millions and millions of cubic feet of water. And to do that desalination to that amount of water is going to be enormously expensive.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay. Jean, are you with us? No. Yeah, Maureen.
Sorry, can I have another question? The South China Sea, the routes, it's always mentioned, there are ships in the South China Sea and the Chinese are claiming islands and trying to, but presumably that's to protect the oil supply, because there isn't a very easy way. If you look at all the islands and Japan and all these places, it's very difficult, presumably, to physically get through if you're trying to ship.
Well, it's a political game, and from China's point of view, they are building those islands in order to be able to have better access to Taiwan in case there is going to be, a lot more, heat developing there. China says, this is our red line. We are not going to give up on Taiwan. Taiwan is part of China, and we will go to war if need be. So it's the question of seeing whether China and USA can come to an agreement about this flow of navigating those waters. China has said, no, we have no problem navigation. It's just that these islands are in our territory. We're going to claim it, and that's it. Yeah, June. You had your hand up.
No.
No. Okay.
I don't follow the news very well, but I understand the G7 are sort of militating against China, aren't they?
Yes, they formed something called the Quad. The Quad made up of Japan, Australia, India, and USA. And their sort of objective there is to try and contain China as much as possible. Now they're, trying to drum up support here in the G7 to bring in trade sort of sanctions or whatever else that they can do to try and hold China back. But as Mahbubani says, I sent you that link in my last talk. So if you go to the archive on the timetable and press the archive button, you'll see my last week's talk on there. And the very first slide has the link to Professor Mahbubani, who talks about a global perspective, especially in relation to China and USA. And I think he's the only one that I've heard that makes so much sense. And I think he is worth listening to.
Thank you.
It's quite interesting how poor our news has become. I mean, as June was saying, we and George, we just don't get it. I was listening to the radio at lunchtime today, and like the first 3/4 of the program pretty much was about the virus and just interviewing people. And then I thought, that's finished. It's going to be something more global, more interesting. And it was the blooming football that they put in next. And they were interviewing some child in Scotland that was going to be watching it during the school day. And I think, what? This is it's supposed to be a news program, an international news. It does actually call itself.
Yeah.
Bizarrely devoid of anything of any use.
Yeah, you see these big sort of producers of news are, I think, falling by the wayside because of their own agendas, because they're easily controlled by big money or by governments. Therefore, I've stopped listening to the news.
Yeah.
I used to every morning regularly, like prayers, listen to Today program from 6 o'clock till about 10 o'clock. And now I don't do that for the past 6 months.
It's pointless.
I've said this is a dumbing down process as far as, if it's not covering the politics of UK versus other, if it's not covering that item or that section of news, then it's okay. But the moment UK gets involved, then they slant it because, the Foreign Office pays for BBC a quarter of their budget or whatever. So they can't go out and say things too sort of openly. So we don't really have a free press. So don't feel that you are obligated to listen to what they have to say. And what those press has become now, if you ask me, is really a vehicle to keep people dumbed down a bit so that they're not aware of what the real issues are of the world. And that's why football comes in quite frequently.
It's like confectionery.
That's right. Yeah, George.
Yes, I'm just looking at the Guardian, on my app, and just very interested in what you're saying. There is a headline here that's just come in: NATO summit, which is taking place this week. Leaders to agree that China presents security risk.
Oh God!
NATO leaders will agree that China represents a security risk at their annual summit in Brussels. Yeah, it's the same old game.
Yeah.
You see, they played the game against Soviet Russia before, and then in the interim period, Islam became the terrorism war and so on, demonizing Islam whichever way you could, and now it's China. So it's a sort of a slogan that gets used, which in every case I think is a losing proposition, if you ask me. Okay, I've got an executive committee meeting of the U3A to attend at 4 o'clock. I've been nominated to sort of join, so let me see what happens over there.
You better go to that. Yeah.
Okay, see you. Bye, Shafiq.
Okay, bye. Thank you for your contribution. Bye.
Brilliant.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.